Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bill Eller at the Washington State Conservation Commission. I am based out of Yakima, and I am the Commission's election officer. I've been the Commission's election officer since 2010. And I have a presentation about elections for you, kind of the current highlights of statistics from the last election cycle. And we should have plenty of time for questions, so I would urge you, if you have a burning election question, to type it into that chat or the question feature, and then we can make sure, if we don't answer it in the presentation, we can make sure and get it answered at the end. But there should be time at the end, plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to jump right into my presentation, unless there's anything I missed there off the beginning. I'll try to pause every now and again and take a look and see if there's any questions. We're going to cover a little bit about the rules, what's available for districts on the Commission's webpage, go over the election statistics from the last cycle, and then talk about some of the special circumstances we encountered and what that's going to look like moving forward for us, for those of you out there who do elections for your district. So as I said, I am the Commission's election officer. What that means is I do all of the administrative stuff related to elections for the Commission, with an eye toward certification and announcement of the official winners. I don't really do too much of the policy stuff. I do kind of on the ground work, and then if any issues come up, I'll help work through with you those issues, and I might have to do investigations and that sort of thing for the districts, for the Commission. But that's my role. Our election rules, which are in the Washington Administrative Code, the WAC, are established from our enabling statute, RCW 8908, specifically Section 190. So the Commission sets procedures for elections, and we do that primarily through the WAC, but we also have a bunch of other stuff that we'll talk about. And then we certify and announce the results. So we don't conduct the elections for you, unfortunately. Each one of the districts, all 45 districts, run your own elections, and then we're kind of the oversight agency for that process. So that's a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because we are somewhat out of the process of running the election. So there's some good checks and balances in the system, but the bad thing is you guys have to run your own election, which means someone at the district has to be responsible for this. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So our elections are not governed by the general election rules. So there's a specific exemption in the RCW, in the general election rules, that takes us out of that general election process. And that also is a good and a bad thing, depending on what your perspective is. But what that means in a practical sense for us in the Conservation District family is that the general voter and the general candidate and the general member of the public out there doesn't usually understand that. They don't understand that we're not part of that general election process. So there's usually some amount of education that needs to go on for all those folks so that they can understand what our elections are like. And if any of you have been around for our elections, you know that they're sort of kind of pretty close to the general election process. We just have a lot more flexibility because we are those special purpose districts to conduct the elections. And the biggest difference probably in most voters' minds is we don't send out ballots by mail to every possible voter. That's not a requirement under our rules. So, all right, let me move ahead here if I can. Whoops, I think I went backwards. There we go. So the election timeline kind of looks like that on your screen. We're in a little bit of a lull since elections, the cycle ends typically in May, the third Thursday in May. This fall, August, September, we'll have the election training, and that's when is a really good time for you guys to review procedures and adopt policies that you might need at your district. October through December generally is when you're preparing all of your paperwork and notices for your election. And then the statute requires that elections be held between January and March. So sometime in there, you're going to have your election, and then you report your results. Usually that takes through April-ish, and that's when the commission also canvasses results. And election winners are certified and announced at that third Thursday in May. So I can tell you that tentatively, the election training webinar this fall will be Wednesday, October 6th, but we'll have plenty of notices going out about that. So I wouldn't, don't try to commit that to memory, but that's when it will be. But as you guys all know, all these webinars get recorded. So if you miss the training, you can always watch the recording later because it will always be posted on the commission's webpage. So I think I already talked a little bit about the roles and responsibilities, kind of trying to make sure everyone knows their place in the system here. What you guys do for district elections is a little bit different than what the commission does. And we'll talk a bit about the before, during, and after of conducting an election as well. I already talked a little bit about this too. You guys know who's all involved in the elections. And if my mouse is tracking here, you can see in the upper left is commission staff. Over to the right is pretty much folks at the district. And then you have the vast majority of folks that participate in our elections, which is the public, either as candidates, voters, or in the parties, or observers, or service groups who help us with elections. So a lot of folks available, or who are involved in our elections. So talking about things that are available for the districts, and primarily for folks at the districts who are responsible for elections, you're going to be interested in this. But the commission, I think a year or two ago, split out its election web pages into three. One is for voters and the public, and that's this one that's on your screen there. The next one is really directed at candidates and persons who are interested in being appointed to appointed seats. And then the third one, so and what we have for them, for the candidates and the applicants for appointment on that web page, is we have specific guides for them to use. And I would urge you, if you're at all getting folks who are interested in being a candidate or an appointee, to have them look through the guides, because the whole purpose of those is to kind of answer all their questions about the process, so they don't have to bug you with all their questions. So I would direct them there and then say, if you have more questions, you can contact you guys again. And if they still have questions, they can always contact me at the commission. All right, the third web page that I talked about is this one here, specific for all you all at the districts. It's for election administrators, so the folks at the district who are actually running the election, and it's under that Conservation District Resources page on our webpage. So probably most of you have found that by now. We have a lot of stuff there. Some of the stuff we have is the election guide, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it also kind of in the guide incorporates the other two guides that we just talked about for the appointment folks and for the candidates. And then we also have all of the election forms that you need are there. And then we also have links to the WAC. So the election guide, we just recently updated this. I think it was 60 pages or so. And we cut out all of the WAC language, all the WAC rule language, and left that in the WAC. So we took that all out, and I think now it's somewhat less than 30 pages. I think I want to say 25 or something like that. So it's a lot less for you to read, and really it's just focused on supplementing the WAC, and shouldn't have anything other than maybe some citations to WACs in it. We've tried to keep the guide up to date. We're always looking to improve it. You can see some of the changes we made based on the WAC changes we made a year or two ago that the commission made. I can tell you that right now we have two changes related to the guide that are out for comment from the districts, and those two changes, we'll talk a little bit more detail about them, but it really is just based on what happened with COVID and doing more mail-in elections. So we have sample election resolutions, we have sample mail-in notice that you can use. And that's really the only changes we made this year, and those are out on our webpage, available for comment right now through, I think, the beginning of July, with an eye for the commission to adopt those changes in the guide at the July commission meeting. So I don't think it's really anything controversial. It's just to give you guys additional sample notices and resolutions, but you're free to comment on those for the next month or so, I think, or what, 2 weeks maybe, or 3 weeks. Election form, electronic form number 1 and number 2. So these are the two forms the commission requires the districts fill out. The form on the left is the kind of before the election form, and the form on the right is the after the election form. So if you've ever done elections, I'm sure you're very familiar with these two forms. We also try to keep these up to date with all the changes that have been made to the WAC, and they're available for you on that commission webpage. We also have the election calculator, which is a shorthanded way for you to type into this box when you think you might have an election, and then it will spit back out kind of a timeline of minimum dates to do certain things, certain activities. So a very shorthanded way for folks who are really spreadsheet oriented to see what an election looks like. So that's available for you. And then we also have the master checklist. So for folks who don't like either of those options, another option is to kind of a check the box, go through this master checklist at the very back of the election and appointment guide, and you just check each box as you get all of those things done. So lots of different options for you moving forward with your election. And new this year, primarily because of COVID and the tie-in between COVID and all the changes we made last September to the WAC, we held election forums twice a month from October through March. We had pretty good attendance October through December, and then things kind of tapered off as we got into the heart of the election season. We are not planning on doing these election forums next fall, but if we hear a large clamor for them, we can always bring them back. But because we kind of had sparse attendance, it's really not necessarily the most effective use of time, I think, for folks, but forums are always good. Maybe we'll just do them once a month or something like that. But I'd be curious to know if folks would like to see those or not. All right, so let's talk about what happened this past election cycle. So, and before we do that, let's jump even further back in time. So this is what elections looked like before the pandemic. So this was January of 2020 through March of 2020. So the pandemic started right down here, right? The last week of March of 2020. You can see where districts had, in this 3 months, where they had set their elections. And the districts that are in a red box actually held elections. So back before the pandemic started, we had an ability at the commission and districts to cancel an election. So that's what this reflects, is there were only 12 districts in January through March of 2020 that held elections, those ones in the red box. So you can kind of see also where the spread of elections were over that 3 month span. So this past election cycle, so in January through March of 2021, you can see there's no red boxes, and that reflects that change that was made by the commission to eliminate the canceling of elections. So what that means is every single district had an election, and you can see how that worked out for when they held elections. And the major shift here is you got many more down in March holding elections, which is probably more a function of COVID and some other things going on there. And again, it's not necessarily there's any issue with that, or it's just kind of FYI if folks are really interested in when districts have elections. So this is a chart that shows you what I was just talking about, is the commission used to have, and districts used to have, an option to cancel an election. And over the life of when that option was available from 2011 through 2020, you can see about, greater than 2/3 of districts typically took advantage of that and were able to cancel their election. That is no longer an option for us. So that's why this is just down here for 0. And it's just kind of to highlight that change for you. The number of candidates we've had in elections since 2009 through 2021 has been pretty, I think there's a way to do that. Line on there, it's pretty stable increase over that amount of time. Pretty much at least one candidate at every district in that time frame. The total number of ballots cast since 2011 through 2021 is pretty much
Bill, we can't hear you. Not sure what's going on, but check your mic.
Oh, I still can't hear you, Bill. Can you hear? Oh, there you are.
Oh, sorry, did you lose me?
Yeah, we lost you for maybe 30 seconds there or so.
Oh gosh, okay, so should I go back a slide?
I think this is a slide, but maybe just start from the top on this.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So this slide just shows the total number of ballots cast in CD elections since 2011 down here in the bottom left. So you can see we've always been pretty much on an increasing path with that, but the total number of ballots cast in our elections, given that we have pretty much a statewide coverage except for some of the municipalities and the districts, this is always a topic of conversation for folks. It's a current topic of conversation for the WACB and Commission Elections Committee. So just to highlight that for you. And another thing we keep track of is the Commission RMs, regional managers, typically go out and observe elections. That serves two purposes. One, we can observe, and one, we can kind of help if we are there and there's things we can help with. So we try to get out and do that. But you can see for COVID, we weren't able to do that at all this year. That's why that's a 0. But we try to get out and try to see some percentage of all the districts that hold elections. And again, prior to 2020, we had that ability to cancel elections. So it's our percentage when we get to do it next year, hopefully, it's probably going to be a lot closer to the 6% because we're going to have all 45 districts holding elections, right? But there's only, what, 5 or 6 regional managers, so they can only do so many elections, that's for sure. But, all right, let's talk about special circumstances this election cycle. We've already talked about some of these. COVID-19 pandemic, you guys knew, I think this time last year it was a big topic of conversation, what it might look like going through this election cycle. I think the reaction from districts primarily was one of, let's try to do as much mail-in type elections as possible. And I think that worked out really, really well. And then some of the districts waited until the very end in March to try to hold their election. I think that also helped them because even if you didn't hold a mail-in election, you were able to hold a in-person election and deal with the social distancing issues related to that. So all in all, I didn't hear too much angst amongst the districts about having to conduct an election during COVID. I think we heard a lot more about that last November during the presidential election. So I guess no news is good news on that. Didn't hear too much about that. Yeah, probably we heard more about this topic that's on your screen now than we did about COVID affecting elections. And that's the changes the commission made in September 2020. So those of you who've been tracking with elections know that the commission since at least 2019 has been working to make changes to the WAC and those culminated and finally got adopted in September of 2020. So you all had to deal with all those changes, the biggest one being that first bullet about every district holding elections. Another big one was that there was no nominating petitions, and there is no requirement for nominating petitions moving forward. And then another big one was the change in write-in eligibility to give write-ins a little bit more, to make them more eligible to be voted in during our elections. So those are three big changes. There were many, many other changes as well, but we don't have to go into all of those unless you want to. Cascadia and Palouse, they had some hiccups with their election process. Cascadia just held their redone election on June 9th, and I believe they had one candidate and they had 2 voters. So that Cascadia's election for 2021 is done. It will be certified, I believe, if all things go okay, at the July commission meeting. Palouse CD is a little bit more of a question mark in my mind. They went to their superior court and tried to do the same thing Cascadia did and get the court to order them a new election because the commission declined to certify their election. But the court had some questions for them, wanted them to post more advertising to the public. So they went and did that, and I think they're still in the process of trying to get back into court to see if the judge is satisfied with that, and then they'll get their election reordered and hold it sometime probably this summer. So if anyone from Palouse is on, you can let me know what the update is there. But I think that's what I know about them at this point. One thing that we were hoping to do was pursue some legislation during the last session, specifically related to CD ballot request lists. And this is stemming from some issues that districts had back in 2019, where they were using lists of keeping track of folks who requested ballots and didn't really realize that some of the information that they were collecting in order to fulfill those ballot requests is not protected like that same information would be under the general election process. It's not protected under our process. So to protect it under our process, we would need to change RCW 4256, public disclosure related to that. But we did not pursue, the commission did not pursue this legislation during the last session because essentially the legislature said if it's not COVID related or related to a few other very specialized topics, you should not pursue it. So we put that on hold to the next session. We have a policy advisory out about that issue, urging you guys to not collect certain information if you can do that, because then you don't run afoul of this issue. And we can go into more detail about that if you want, but that policy or issue advisory there that's on our commission webpage for elections really goes into all the details about that if you want to know more about that. Oh, and I already talked about the election guide changes. Again, that change is posted on our webpage as well for elections. So if you're really interested in that, you can see all the changes and the proposed changes to the guide there. And that is all I had for my presentation. So we'll just pause here and see if folks had any questions.
Okay, so I have one thing that's popped up in the question box, and I don't know if I'm seeing the entire thing. Oh, there it is. Hold on just a minute. Be patient with me. It's still giving me a little trouble. But I think what this is just a comment that despite legal ads, a please vote display ads, a popular public location and newsletter and website notices, apparently this is an explanation as to why there may have been a low turnout, which is kind of cool because it leads me into one of the things I wanted to comment on. I've been kind of listening in on the elections committee and occasionally contributing. And if we are able to have our elections next year the way we've done them in the past, I wanted to urge people to open up the pocketbook and spend a lot of money to advertise and get the vote out, because our district has been loath to, just spend that money, because it just seems like, it's just money out the door that could be going on to projects. But if we lose the ability to run our own elections, it's going to cost us a lot more to have our elections on the general ballot. So in your planning and in your budgeting for the upcoming year, if we're allowed to continue to do this the way we've been doing it, I'm really going to encourage everybody to ask your board to let you spend quite a bit more on advertising, because it might pay off for us in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That's one of the things, low voter turnout, and how that might be addressed primarily through additional advertising is one of the things that committee, joint committee with WACD and the commission's been discussing.
Do we have other comments or questions for Bill? Well, I'm seeing none. There's got to be something out there. Oh, I'm seeing here. It's regarding to just 2 votes. It's not an explanation. It's just an illustration of what can happen despite the effort made. And I certainly can relate to that, because I know despite, it was mentioned at the last meeting we had, and this has happened to us also in Walla Walla, where we have our annual meeting. We have about 50 people who are basically captive, and we have a vote here booth, and we have the ballots ready for them, and we still get 12 votes because people are too busy talking, I suppose. So, it's really going to be important, though, that, as I said, if we can continue to hold our elections the way we've done, to shake the tree hard to get more votes. Any other questions or comments? Another comment here, basically saying, the less controversy you have, the fewer votes you have. And that is absolutely true. And that's come up numerous times also in our discussions with the committee, that when everything's going well, people don't feel like they need to go out and vote. And when there's controversy and there's some, things going on that get people's attention, then you get more votes, although it's not necessarily the nicest place to be at that point. Still, totally agree that when we're doing our job right and everybody's happy with what we're doing, they're not that interested in voting. And that's just one of those ironies. And a comment saying, I guess people are blissfully unaware or are very happy with us. And that's true. Are there any other comments or questions? Bill, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I mentioned for those of you that have to do the one change we didn't talk about was that every year district folks have to be trained on elections. So I mentioned that we'll be having that training October 6th, I think at 10 in the morning. But again, we'll send out plenty of notice about that. So enjoy your summer, and then we will definitely talk to most of you in October about elections.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you.